The Dollhouse Murders, a Symphony of Terror. Sarah, a writer perpetually drowning in rejection letters and dwindling savings, stumbled upon a curious package nestled amongst the usual bills and flyers on her doorstep. It was heavy for its size, and a shiver ran down her spine as she cradled it in her arms. Inside, nestled in a bed of packing peanuts, lay a miniature replica of her own apartment. She gasped, staring at the tiny version of her messy living room, the chipped paint on the windowsill faithfully reproduced. Even the overflowing ashtray by the cluttered desk, a testament to her late-night writing sessions fueled by cheap coffee and despair, was recreated in miniature. But it was the figures inside the dollhouse that truly sent a jolt of terror through her. Tiny porcelain dolls, perfect replicas of Sarah and her grumpy landlord, Mr. Henderson, stood frozen in the miniature apartment. Their faces, with unsettlingly lifelike details, the faint lines around Mr. Henderson's eyes, the worry etched on Sarah's brow, seemed to hold a hidden malevolence. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Henderson's beady black eyes, mere dots of paint, were following her every move. That night, sleep was a stranger. Images of the dollhouse flickered behind her eyelids, replacing the comforting darkness with a miniature world filled with an unsettling sense of foreboding. In a fever dream, she heard tiny screams, a sickening thud echoing from within the dollhouse. She woke with a gasp, cold sweat clinging to her skin. The next morning, news reports confirmed her worst fears. Mr. Henderson was found dead in his apartment, a pool of crimson blooming around his head. The scene, a grotesque caricature, mirrored the one Sarah had witnessed in her dream. Panic choked her, a cold hand squeezing her heart. She raced back to the dollhouse, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The scene inside had shifted. The doll dressed in Mr. Henderson's trademark robe lay crumpled on the miniature living room floor, a tiny smear of red marring the pristine white floorboards. Days bled into weeks, each sunrise bringing a new scene of horror to the dollhouse. A spilled cup of coffee in the miniature apartment mirrored a broken mug in her own kitchen. A chipped tooth on the Sarah doll followed a trip and fall on her part. The lines between reality and the dollhouse began to blur. She'd flinch at phantom sounds from within the miniature house, finding herself reaching for a cup of coffee that wasn't there. The once comforting routine of her life became a twisted game played out by unseen hands. The dolls, silent observers, became her constant companions. Her fear intensified with each passing day. The once familiar creak of the floorboards sounded like tiny screams, and the flickering streetlights outside cast grotesque shadows that seemed to mimic the movements of the dolls. Despair gnawed at Sarah's sanity. Her rejection pile grew taller, mirroring the growing sense of hopelessness that threatened to consume her. The dollhouse had become an obsession, a grotesque reflection of her own life slowly unraveling. She started keeping a journal, meticulously documenting every detail, the changes in the dollhouse, the strange coincidences in her own life. One afternoon, a frantic pounding at the door jolted her from her obsessive scribbling. It was Mrs. Ramirez, the elderly woman from downstairs, her face a mask of terror. Mrs. Ramirez, a constant source of gossip and unwanted conversation, now spoke in hushed tones about a dark presence in the building, a feeling of suffocating dread that had descended ever since the strange package arrived. Sarah dismissed Mrs. Ramirez's ramblings at first, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Was she imagining things? Was the dollhouse playing tricks on her mind? Or was something more sinister at play? The internet offered little solace. Obscure forums hinted at malevolent spirits trapped in objects, curses passed down through generations, and vengeful entities seeking retribution. None of it offered answers, only fueling the paranoia gnawing at Sarah's sanity. Desperate for answers, Sarah delved into the history of the building. Days were spent hunched over dusty microfilm at the library, piecing together a fragmented history of the tenement. She discovered the building had a dark past, rumored to be the site of a tragic fire that claimed several lives decades ago. The whispers spoke of a young dollmaker who perished in the flames, his collection of intricately crafted dolls lost forever. A chilling realization struck Sarah. The dollhouse, an exact replica of her apartment, was too perfect to be a random coincidence. Could it hold the key to the haunting? Could the dolls be somehow connected to the fire, to the doll maker? Driven by a morbid curiosity and a desperate hope of breaking the curse, Sarah ventured into the dusty basement, the air thick with the smell of mildew and forgotten things. Armed with a flashlight and a growing sense of dread, she navigated the labyrinthine corridors, the flickering beam revealing cobwebs clinging to exposed pipes and peeling paint revealing cryptic messages scrawled on the walls. A faint scratching sound, like tiny claws on concrete, sent shivers down her spine. The flashlight beam landed on a boarded-up doorway at the far end of the corridor. It was the only unexplored section, a dark, festering wound in the building's underbelly. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but Sarah knew she had to see what lay beyond. With trembling hands, she pried loose the rotting boards, revealing a hidden chamber. A wave of stale air, thick with the smell of burnt wood and something more sinister, washed over her. Inside, the room was illuminated by a single flickering bulb. Dust motes danced in the pale light, revealing a scene as if frozen in time. A workbench overflowing with half-finished dolls lay in the center, each one with unsettlingly lifelike features. A chair lay overturned beside it, and on the wall hung an assortment of delicately crafted dolls, their painted faces seeming to hold a silent scream. But what truly sent a jolt of terror through Sarah was the charred skeleton slumped in the corner, clutching a single, eerily familiar doll, a miniature version of the dollhouse itself. As Sarah stumbled back, the floorboard beneath her creaked, echoing through the chamber. A gust of wind, seemingly from nowhere, extinguished the bulb, plunging her into darkness. Panic seized her as she fumbled for the flashlight, the scratching sound growing louder, closer. Suddenly, a cold hand clamped over her mouth. A chilling whisper rasped in her ear. "Don't leave yet. The story's just getting started." The beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing the source of the voice. A doll. A grotesque replica of the doll maker himself, his painted eyes burning with an unnatural malice. The miniature Sarah doll in the dollhouse mirrored the scene. A tiny hand clamped over its porcelain mouth. Sarah screamed, a primal cry of terror that echoed through the basement. In the chaos, she dropped the flashlight, the darkness engulfing her once more. She scrambled back, desperate to escape, but unseen hands grabbed her ankles, pulling her down. The world dissolved into a cacophony of sounds, her own ragged breaths, the chilling laughter of the dolls, the scratching that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then, a sickening crunch, followed by a horrifying silence. Sarah awoke with a gasp, cold sweat clinging to her skin. She was back in her apartment, the morning sunlight filtering through the dusty window. Relief washed over her, so intense it bordered on euphoria. But as her eyes fell on the dollhouse, a wave of dread settled in her stomach. The scene inside had changed. The miniature Sarah doll lay on the floor of the dollhouse, its porcelain face cracked, a dark stain spreading across its chest. The dollmaker doll was gone, replaced by a scene that sent a fresh wave of terror through her. The miniature Sarah stood poised with a tiny knife, a replica of the one Sarah kept under her pillow. The knife was pointed at the miniature Mr. Ramirez, the elderly woman from downstairs, his tiny porcelain face contorted in a silent scream. Sarah knew then that the nightmare wasn't over. It had simply taken a new form. She was trapped in a twisted game, forced to watch as the dolls enacted their macabre plans. The only way to break the curse, she realized with chilling certainty, was to play by their rules. Days turned into weeks, each morning revealing a new scene of impending doom in the dollhouse. Sarah, driven to desperation, sought help from anyone who would listen: eccentric antique dealers, occult figures lurking in the fringes of society, anyone who might offer a glimmer of hope. But the answers remained elusive. Each encounter only confirmed the chilling truth. She was the target, the dollhouse a macabre puppet show leading to her inevitable demise. Yet, amidst the despair, a flicker of defiance sparked within her. She wouldn't be a pawn in their twisted game. One night, fueled by a potent concoction brewed by a shadowy figure she found on the dark web, Sarah stood before the dollhouse. The miniature Sarah doll mirrored her stance, a determined glint in its painted eyes. "I won't be your puppet," Sarah declared, her voice hoarse with determination. "This ends now." As she spoke, an ancient incantation rose to her lips. The words gleamed from dusty tomes and whispered secrets. The room grew cold, the shadows dancing on the walls as the power of the ritual crackled in the air. The dolls within the house writhed, their painted faces contorting in silent screams. The miniature Sarah doll in the dollhouse raised its tiny hand, mimicking Sarah's movements, and the two figures chanted in unison, their voices echoing eerily in the small space. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the lights and plunging them into darkness. A cold, spectral hand clamped over Sarah's shoulder, its touch sending shivers down her spine. A raspy voice, ancient and filled with malice, whispered in her ear, "You cannot defy fate, child. The game is afoot, and you are but a player." Fear threatened to consume her, but Sarah pushed forward, fueled by a desperate hope. "I choose my own fate," she gritted out, channeling every ounce of her will. As she spoke, a blinding light erupted from the dollhouse, momentarily banishing the darkness. Sarah shielded her eyes, then peeked through her fingers to witness a sight that stole her breath away. Inside the dollhouse, the miniature figures were locked in a struggle. The dollmaker doll, his face twisted in rage, grappled with a spectral figure that resembled a young boy, his form shimmering like smoke. It was the spirit of the deceased dollmaker, trapped and bound to the dolls he had created. The spectral boy reached for the miniature Sarah doll, his touch causing it to glow with an ethereal light. Then, with a final, heart-wrenching cry, the boy and the doll merged. The blinding light subsided, leaving behind an unsettling quiet. The dollhouse remained open, the miniature Sarah doll now a perfect replica of the spectral boy, its eyes filled with a newfound peace. Sarah cautiously reached out a finger, touching the miniature boy's porcelain face. A warmth bloomed where her finger met the cold porcelain, and a sense of calm washed over her. The spectral touch on her shoulder was gone. The next morning, news broke that a young boy's remains had been discovered during construction work near the building. The boy, it seemed, had been a talented dollmaker who perished in a fire decades ago. The story resonated with Sarah, a chilling confirmation of the truth she had unearthed. The dollhouse remained, a constant reminder of the ordeal, but the scenes within no longer depicted impending doom. Instead, they showed the boy, his miniature form now infused with a gentle warmth, playing with the other dolls, a smile gracing his porcelain face. The curse was broken, but Sarah was forever changed. The experience had left its mark, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface. Yet, within the darkness, she had discovered a flicker of light, the courage to face her fears, and the resilience of the human spirit. As she continued writing, her stories no longer reflected the despair of rejection letters. They now held a newfound depth, a touch of the unsettling that resonated with a raw, primal fear. The world may not have been ready for her genius before, but her brush with the darkness had forged her into a storyteller unlike any other. The dollhouse, a symbol of horror, had become her muse, a reminder that the greatest stories often reside in the shadows, waiting to be unearthed.